Welcome to Potential Show. This is a show where we sit down with founders and investors to talk about their stories and secrets to succeed in the international startup world and make an impact on society. So before this episode begins, let me introduce Justin a little bit more so you will get to know the context and enjoy this show even more. So Justin, he started his first company when he was 19. The company was called Zynga, a social game developer, and he went public only after 4 years of founding at the valuation of $7 billion. After that, Justin left Zynga and became a full-time angel investor, investing in more than 50 companies, and his portfolio include Tolo, which was acquired by Google, Viv, acquired by Samsung, and also some YC-backed companies like Lambda School, Substack, and some Japanese companies like Smartland, and also he's an LP in Peter Thiel's Founders Fund. Now, talking about his first company, Zynga, it's well known for titled Zynga Poker and Farmville. Farmville revealed its popularity within only 6 weeks of releasing and attracted over 10 million users. Well, this was possible thanks to their amazing team, but also thanks to their top-tier investors like SoftBank Capital, Google, Union Square Ventures, Kleiner Perkins, SB Angel, and more. Now, talking about his newest company, Playco, it's a Tokyo-based gaming venture founded by Justin Walden and former CEO of Game Closure, Michael Carter. And also, this was started by other prominent video game producers, Takeshi Otsuka and Teddy Kloss. Their vision is to democratize the gaming experience where users can instantly play video game on any device without downloading an app. This means, for example, I want to play a game on a Zoom call. I can just do that by sharing the hyperlink to the title on a Zoom chat. Boom, I can play the game. Now, talking about Playco, we gotta mention about their successful 100 Series A round, which was led by Josh Buckley at Sequoia Capital. The round was also participated by other prominent venture capital firms like Sozo Ventures, Caffeinated Capital, Makers Fund, and also Keisuke Honda's Keisuke Angel Fund, and Will Smith's Dreamers VC, and Taizo Son's Mistletoe. What made Justin this successful? What's the story? What's the secrets behind all this? You want to know it? Now, let's listen to this episode with Justin Walden. For today, we have Justin, co-founder and former senior vice president of Zynga, which is top social gaming platform. Zynga went public in 2011 at valuation of $7 billion, raising $1 billion, which is the largest IPO since Google back then. After he left Zynga, he became a full-time angel investor. He also recently co-founded a new gaming company, Playco, with Michael Carter. Currently, he serves as the president of the new company and announced successful 100 million Series A. Justin, thank you so much for being here today.
Yeah, I'm excited to be here. Thanks, Rio.
Thank you. So I really want to cover a lot of things about you. And you, after you dropped out of college and started the company with 6 other co-founders, was it 5 co-founders?
Yeah, well, so what happened there is I was in university when the Facebook platform was released, and so I got really excited about it. And so the first day it came out, I went and I built an app as quickly as I could. And I put something up the first day the platform was released. And I was just interested in connecting people to play games, actually. And a lot of people don't know this story, but there was, at the time, the Nintendo Wii had these friend codes, which were like a very long telephone number that you could share with your friends so that you can play a Wii game with them. But it was very difficult to share these numbers. So I just made a very simple application on Facebook where you could put in your friend code number, and then you could see all the friend code numbers of all the other people who are your friends on Facebook. So you could very easily connect them on the Nintendo Wii. And Mark Pincus, the CEO of Zynga, he reached out to me and just said, hey, this is really interesting. Like why don't we go build some social apps together? And that was sort of how things got started. And the first app we went and built was a poker app, because at that time Facebook was all college students, and
Right.
college students in the US loved poker at the time, myself included. So that was sort of what got everything started.
Oh, wait. So that was when Facebook was not public for people like, older than college students. So it was only for college students, Facebook at the time.
Yeah, I'm not sure the exact time that Facebook switched over and started adding other people in the US. But like the platform was right around the same time. Yeah. So even if they had already opened it up, it was like still majority college students. I can't remember the exact timing.
I see. That's why it was like a really good kind of marketing tool or platform for you guys, right? Making games for Facebook users.
Well, and that's kind of the idea, which is like, what was the right and the perfect thing to make for those people who are using Facebook at the time. So rather than this idea of going and making a company that would eventually be about making games for everybody, really this smaller idea of what do college students want to do with each other? And at that time, it was play poker. And then once we did that, we built that experience, and we realized when we played it, wow, this is very different from any experience we've had playing poker online before. Having the real names and the real photos and connecting with your friends automatically. This is a different experience. And then after that, this is a whole new type of game. We've got to go do this with as many different types of games as we can. And so like, I think that a lot of these ideas, they start small. So of course we always had like big aspirations to build a larger company. But we started by experimenting, and then we sort of figured out what worked and went from there.
Right. And that really worked, right? So you launched the best known game, which was, I think, Farmville on Facebook in June 2009, and it reached 10 million daily users within 6 weeks. That's a pretty good viral growth that you had, right? What would you say was the viral growth driver? Was it just Facebook advertising, Facebook platform, or what else was there, would you say?
Yeah, I mean, I think that there were a lot of things happening at once that were new back. So like one was this idea of a new business model. Before that time, all games were paid for up front. And it was something where you went to the store and you spent $50 and you got a game. And the only thing you knew about that game was what you read in a video game magazine and the reviews that you saw and the commercial you watched and the movie poster that you saw hanging on the wall in the store. And we took that model and we basically said, no, you can try it for free. And then you can play as long as you want. And then if you like it, you can also invite your friends, and you can also spend money if you want. And if you don't want to, that's also fine. The thing about making it free is like that opened up this idea that you could play with anyone, because if I wanted to play a game with you, but I also had to convince you to spend $50 on the game, well, then that's very high friction.
Right.
And so the business model enabled it to be social. And then when it's social, then we could actually redesign the whole game to be something that wasn't really something you could play by yourself. So if you think about it, like the games that you would buy for the console, they had to have a single player mode because, in most situations, you didn't have a friend over to play with. But the games that you played online, we thought the default should be social. It should be something you can do with somebody else. And so when you look at a game like Farmville, it's not like one single thing that we did. It's sort of a combination of that realization. And then how do you take these new business models and this new distribution through the social channels, and this new experience where people can just land on a page and play a game, and then builds a space that people want to spend time with each other in it. And so Farmville was like sort of in a lot of ways the first time that it was easy to, with your friends, go and like hang out in a virtual space that didn't require you to be there at the same time. It wasn't like a live virtual world. It was very casual, build your space, let your friends visit, you go visit your friends. And we learned a lot from the games we released before Farmville to understand, what players wanted and to basically have a really good idea of how to build that game in a way that people would enjoy. And so even though Farmville was really the moment that our company became famous for like the broader sort of technology community, by the time that we had released Farmville, like Zynga already had many games that were very large for like these other players, and we just weren't really talking about it more broadly yet.
I see. What were those other games? Was it like a Zynga Poker or Friend with Two, Word with Friends 2, or those games you were talking about?
Yeah, I mean, the first game was Zynga Poker, and so I was the original engineer on Zynga Poker, and
Oh, really?
the product manager behind like the initial design. I and that game is still very popular today, and that was the first game that we built at the company. So like actually, that was years before Farmville, right? And so we had a game called Mafia Wars that was very big. There was a game called Yoville that was very big. It was the largest virtual world in the world at the time. From each one of these games, we sort of learned another set of things about what types of things that people wanted to do when they were playing with their friends. And we just kept sort of building on it with each new game that we would release.
Right. And according to the Zynga's website, 57 million games being played at any given moment, right? And also after 4 years of founding, you went public at a valuation of 7 billion, raising $1 billion. And what would you say, right now, so your viral growth at the time was maybe a Facebook platform, and how you kind of picked the thing that would be viral for those college students. But now you funded Playco, and also you invested in a bunch of companies. Would you say the driver for those viral growth has changed in the past decade? What would you say is the new driver for viral growth?
Yeah, I mean, I think what we've seen is that the market for startups and just for consumer experiences is bigger than it's ever been. I mean, just to give you an idea, when we started Zynga, Facebook was 20 million users. When we IPO'd, Facebook was about 200 million users. And at this time, it just felt so big. I mean, it felt huge. And now, Facebook has almost 3 billion users, I believe. And so there's been over 10x growth since then. And so I think that the main thing that's changed is more people globally are all connected and part of these ecosystems now. And so on some level, you'd expect that anybody should be able to very easily play with their friends. Like after all, we all have a phone, and we're all connected to the phone. And we have the app stores, and we have these ways of downloading and using great content. But it gets back to that point I was mentioning earlier, which is about friction. And this idea that for me to play with you, I need to convince you to go and play too. And one friction that we removed previously was the idea of spending money up front. And that was really important to make games that you could play with your friends. And another piece of friction that's now part of the problem in our view is this idea that you have to download these apps up front, and everything lives in the apps. And this is an experience that, although it's not as bad as going and spending $50 at a store, it's actually today, downloading apps is something that most people don't look forward to doing. Some of them are very large. They require you to connect to Wi-Fi. It takes time. You got to create a new account. It's sort of like this experience that we do it for the apps that we really are convinced that we need and that we want. But when it comes to trying out a new experience with a friend, something serendipitous, it really gets in the way. And so we feel like if you want to do something with a friend and convince them, hey, let's try this out, people don't usually do that with apps because it feels like too much work just to get started. Right. And so our insight is that, using technology that we've created, whether it be streaming or web-based technologies, we can create this experience where I can share you something. And when you tap it, you're immediately jumping into an interesting experience with me that's fun. And by doing that, we can get back to this idea where we don't lose all the people that would otherwise leave through all those different steps of the app installation and sort of setup process, so that people have confidence when they share with their friends that, oh, my friend will probably jump in, because it's just as easy as sending like a GIF or something in a messenger. So
yeah, I definitely feel that. So I think you were an investor in the startup world, and also I live in this industry, and usually a lot of people are like, founders come to me and, Rayhan, please download this app. I made this app, and then like a lot of people come to me, and I'm like, oh, I only have this data available there, or I can only use another 2 GB until it gets November, right?
But if you don't have to actually download app, I think, yeah, that will definitely remove a lot of friction. But also, I think not just from the user side, but also for the developer side, it's a good thing, right? If you don't have to go through Apple Store or Android Store, since Apple Store or Android Store, they take the what they call Apple tax or the platformer fee, right? And I believe the Zynga, in the beginning, Zynga, people on the Facebook platform, you could just download things from Facebook, but Facebook started to charge fee for those people that's making money on the Facebook platform. And that was maybe one of the reasons why Zynga Zynga's growth kind of plateaued. What would you say about this?
Yeah, I mean, there's a couple pieces in there, I guess.
Sure. Sorry. Yeah.
No problem at all. There's a lot of interesting things to talk about here. One is, I would say, for us, some people in the past have thought about like web technologies as a way of sort of getting around the idea of paying what they call an app store tax. From our perspective, like being able to easily engage with users in a way where they can spend money if they enjoy our products is really important to us.
Absolutely.
And I think like it's important to us that it's a good experience for the users. And so if Apple charges, whatever percent that they can charge and that the market will bear, that's fine by us. And we're not trying to build this technology as a means of getting around any sort of payments infrastructure, because we think it's really about the experience we're trying to create. And I think that Apple's part of that experience and Google's part of that experience. The payments platforms they create they provide a lot of value because they make it very easy for users to participate in these types of small transactions. And whether or not whatever the appropriate fee is sort of like above my pay grade. But we're just working with them because we think they help us monetize these users in a way that's good for everybody. I guess on the Zynga side, what's interesting about that story is like we started building games on the Facebook platform, and Facebook didn't really anticipate that games were going to be one of the main uses of the platform. And it sort of seems obvious in hindsight, but if you look at the original announcement, there wasn't much talk of games or any really. And this whole idea that people would go and spend money inside of games was also a totally new idea. So that wasn't mentioned at all. And so we had to go and build the infrastructure and the design for games for people to even go and do this. And so because it didn't exist, we built it, and then we got better at it and better at it. And then eventually, when it became a large business, we had to figure out like how do we make sure that everybody's interests are aligned, And so that was when we had to figure out with Facebook just like what would make sense in terms of they wanted to provide some payments processing at the platform level, because not everybody could afford to build the infrastructure that we built at Zynga to do this. They wanted to enable all the developers to do it, and of course, as part of that, they wanted everyone to be on the same infrastructure so the experience was good for the user. And so we just had to sort of figure out a way to take everything and make it uniform for the user.
I see. Interesting. So would you say that this Apple tax or Android tax or Facebook tax, whatever that they take, is to some extent in the interest of developers, because they're not rich enough, they don't have enough capital to build a payment system, and actually Apple or Android, they actually cover that part?
Well, I mean, I think that it's the thing about that, the payments processing fee, is that there are a lot of implied services that are rolled into that payments processing fee. So like it's you're paying for Apple to check the security and the quality of all these apps that are being published in the App Store that aren't your app. Maybe there are a bunch of apps that don't get any revenue at all. And these transactions are paying for all the quality assurance that's happening across the whole ecosystem, and just these other sorts of distribution around the downloads and all these other things that are sort of rolled up into these costs. And so I think what makes it a bit complicated is if you look at a company like a Stripe or a company that's in the business of processing payments, their fees are much lower, right? Because they're just only really processing payments in most situations. And so from that perspective, it's easy to look at a 30% rate and say, wow, that seems kind of high. But then there's all these other services that are sort of bundled with that. And I think that ambiguity has left a lot of room for argument. And that's why you're seeing people say like, what is the fair fee? And I think like I said before, like I don't really know. And who knows, like we'll just have to see over the next few years how it shakes out.
Right. Okay. And so, got it. Okay. So I want to talk about your the process of making the Zynga games, right? You were the senior vice president of the firm, so you probably know all the process. So what was the process like? So right now, I think lean startups, all kind of process or kind of popular in the venture world. Maybe it's a little bit old concept, but I think it's still popular. So at the time when you were making game, how was it like? You think like, maybe the college student like poker. Okay, let's make like poker for this amount of users and then see the market reaction and then maybe reflect some feedback from the users. What was it like?
Yeah, I mean, it changed throughout the whole history of the company, right? Like it's hard to generalize because we grew from 5 people to 3,000 in 4 years. So of course, like the process of developing a product, choosing what to build, how you staff it, the cost of developing, all those things changed over time. But one thing in common is just like validating your ideas as early as possible, which is what sort of lean development is really all about. What I would say is like in game development, that's particularly challenging, and it's a great sort of muscle memory to be able to build over time. Is this whole idea of like fun is a very subjective feeling, and and if you're building like a SaaS product, you have a sort of set of features that your clients want, and maybe somebody tells you, "Give me this feature, I'm willing to pay this much for it," and maybe they'll even give you that in a contract before you build the feature. Whereas in a game, no one will give you any guarantees of how they'll respond before you build something. So you really need to become an expert in like the predicting what it is that people, how they will behave when you actually release something. And so the best way that I found to do that is like, you just have to really be rigorous about writing down your assumptions about why you're doing something. And then after you release a feature, you have to go back and check your work and say like, what about my assumptions was right? And what about my assumptions was wrong? And it's not really like an exercise to sort of beat yourself up and say like, look, I got everything wrong. It's more like, where was I wrong and by how much? And so one thing you can do is to write out your assumptions in detail, like the math of your assumptions,
Right.
I have 10 users. And if I make this feature, what % of my users will use this feature? And then if they use this feature, like how will their behavior change, or what will they generate as a result of using this feature? Will it be more engagement? Will it be more retention? And if you can make those predictions, and you walk through all the different numbers that you got to through the end of the funnel, then when you release it, you can go back and see where you're wrong. And then the next time you go and build a feature, well, if you thought 50% of people would use this feature and it was a button in this corner, well, then maybe next time, like you can go back and reference that data and try to understand how many people go and click something that's there. And you start to build this muscle memory of like, instead of just saying this feels good and I want to do it, and you don't learn anything because you're not really like picking apart where it went wrong. You start being able to, in your head, like start to understand more and more over time as you're building this particular product, just what levers you have and what impact you can have in different places. So in general, I would just say we were very data driven. And I guess like that's just more like the process side of the data is what I was talking about.
Right. So you look at the data and then you pretty much kind of repeat that cycle, right? I see. Okay. And so now I want to kind of move to the expansions that Zynga kind of try to have or had. So Zynga, I think, was expanding very aggressively to multiple cities. And one of them, I think, was Tokyo and Japanese market, right? And if my understanding is correct, you led the expansion to Japan, right?
Well, yeah. I mean, so what happened was actually we decided to buy a company in Japan. And that company was called Uno. And that company was, the CEO of that company was Yamada Shintaro.
Yamada-san, Mercalli.
Yeah, the Mercalli CDO. And I, as a part of like that acquisition, I came over to help figure out what team we should work with, and then later to help train the team on sort of product management and integrate with the broader sort of Zynga company. And so I came over for just under a year work with the team. And the goal there was to go and see if we could make progress in the Japanese social gaming market, which at the time was very dominated by Mobage and Gree. And actually, that's when I met Takeshi Otsuka-san, who is one of the founders of Playco. I met him 10 years ago, and I knew he was one of the people at Mobage that was behind their hit game Kaito Royale, and I just admired what they were doing so much, and I heard nothing but good things about him, and I knew I couldn't recruit him to Zynga back in those days, but we kept in touch. Finally got a chance to work together many years later, so it's been very exciting for me.
Nice. So 10 years of recruitment efforts, finally, he is a part of your team. Awesome. And so would you say there's a big difference between the creation of games in Japan and the one in the United States?
Yeah, I mean, that's a good question. I mean, I feel like every team has a very different way of going about making their games, right? And
right.
So I haven't had enough experiences across enough teams to compare very, very closely. But I will say that I think, just my opinion,
sure.
I think that Japan is really great at creating IP. I think if you look at the track record of Japan, and if you look at some of the top 10 grossing IP in the world, many of them are from Japan. I'm not remembering the exact count, but it's okay. Many of the time. On Wikipedia, there's a page where you can see this stat, and there's a lot of franchises up there, like Pokemon and the Hello Kitty and these types of characters and stuff. I think Japan has for some reason been able to consistently create a lot of very large franchises around these characters. And I think it's interesting because even some giant companies like Walt Disney or Pixar that are sort of famous for their ability to create these modern, high quality worlds and characters, they aren't necessarily on the list. And some of them that are on there are quite old. Like I think Winnie the Pooh is sort of on the list as one of the American IPs, and it's a very old IP. And many of the Japanese are actually very more recent, in the last 20 or 30 years. And so, if I were to just speak looking at the sort of what companies have been able to achieve, I'd say Japan is probably one of the best countries in the world when it comes to creating those worlds and those characters.
Interesting. I see. And so I want to talk a little bit more about the raising capital for Zynga now. So Zynga received most of its investment from pretty much top tier investors in the Valley, and also some international top tier investors like SoftBank, right? So for Series B, you had lead investors that were Craner Perkins, Google, and SoftBank. Why is it so important to raise capital from these three top tier VCs, you think?
Well, actually, I think we raised from Google, not their venture arm at the time, but actually the corporate entity, Google.
So from their balance sheet.
Right, yeah. And I think it was maybe even before Google had a venture fund.
Wow.
It was around the time that happened. And then with Kleiner, it was all about the partner. We were working with Bing Gordon, who was one of the earliest employees at Electronic Arts. And he was hugely instrumental at Zynga for helping us, learn how to become a real games company. And so it was all about who you're working with, right?
Right.
With SoftBank, it was, this is way before the Vision Fund days. This was a joint venture to go and figure out if we could go up against the giants of Japan with Gree and DNA, and work with SoftBank to help us to make that happen. And so all of them were sort of very strategic. Actually, even with the Google investment, Google was launching their own social network at that time called Google+.
Oh.
And as part of that investment, we were releasing games on the Google+. So in every case there, it's just super strategic. It's all about the people you're taking money from are all adding value in some way beyond the capital.
Right. And I assume also SoftBank, because you raised money from SoftBank, you were kind of close with them, and when you were coming to Japan, they were the one that helped you come into Japan, right?
Yeah, and it was a very interesting time to come into Japan because SoftBank was just releasing the iPhone, And so the whole idea there was that we knew we were coming into the world of garake in Japan. There's the Galapagos Keitai phones, and this ecosystem was already very, very competitive with games and very big. And we knew that to win in that ecosystem would be very difficult because these players, the companies, were very established. But we knew that smartphone was coming. And so we thought we had a chance to invest in that future of smartphones. And because SoftBank was the first company bringing a smartphone to market with the iPhone, they were starting the new wave that was going to take over Japan. And so that's why we partnered with them. It was to invest in the future of what we thought was coming. And it was ended up being like a really interesting transition to see happen. Like I feel lucky that I was in Japan during that period where I got to see how amazing the sort of Keitai ecosystem was, and then to see what it looked like to see smartphones just starting to grow. It was a very interesting time to be here.
Right. And so you receive, capital from not just those top tier VCs, but also other bunch of top tier VCs, like also I think Andreessen Horowitz invested in you guys. And like you mentioned last time, Peter Thiel and I think Reid Hoffman were also angel investors in Zynga in the very, very early days. What would you say is the like a really good effects or great things about receiving capital from those known top tier people? Some would say it makes you look legit, or it makes you easier to raise capital in the later round, or you can kind of get advantage of the network of those investors. What would you say is the really good things that you can have from those people?
Yeah, I mean, I don't want to make this seem like such a long time ago that I make myself seem older than I am. But it was a lot of those people you described, like Reid Hoffman, Peter Thiel. You didn't mention, but like Fred Wilson and the sort of early investors from Union Square. These are the people who were very early investing in social networks. So Peter Thiel, Reid Hoffman with LinkedIn, and all these investments. Even Fred Wilson with Twitter, like. The reason we ended up partnering with these people is because they understood what we were trying to do. Because Zynga wasn't really a games company. It was like this new type of company that was about kind of like part social networking, part games. And you had to understand both. And so everybody in that group, they just understood what we were doing before other people really did. They're the same group of investors that were investing in these social networks when they were still small and seeing the future in them. They were investing in us. And so, yeah, I mean, today they're all like, even more famous than they were then. But what I would say is like, they predicted this wave right in a huge way. And for us, it just meant that we could communicate with people that understood what we were trying to do and why it mattered back when that wasn't a common sort of understanding for people.
Right. So it wasn't really like a store chasing, like getting just best investors in the valley, or more of they're the one that actually understood about what's next big thing, which was Zynga. I see. Interesting. And you mentioned about Union Square Ventures, but for Series A, you received money from Union Square Ventures. And I assume you received capital another time again, I guess. What would you say was like the deciding factor to choose to work with them? What was the value that they provided to you?
Yeah, I mean, it wasn't something that was decided, exclusively by me, but like, I can just say that, these investors, I mean, they are from my last answer, like they just understand social networks very, very deeply. And so like, if we had investors that were from more traditional game companies, they probably would have misunderstood our story actually, like early on when we were building on these social networks. And instead we had people who were very interested in Fred Wilson, just totally understanding the dynamics of social networks and what we were trying to achieve. So it was like they were all just really great partners that we could work with to go after the mission.
Right. I see. Interesting. Okay. So now I want to talk a little bit more about your another identity. I think you have 3 identities, right? That's what I understand. One is a co-founder of Zynga, another is a full-time angel investor that you were, and then now is president of Playco. So now I want to talk about the second identity of yours, which is angel investor. So after you left Zynga, you started to become a full-time angel investor. Could you tell us a little bit more about how that process was, how you became a full-time angel?
Yeah. I mean, I don't remember having a moment where I just decided I'm going to start angel investing. I think what happened was I worked with all these really great people. And I was always interested in starting new things. And then all of a sudden, some of them started leaving and they were doing new things. And it was just like a way to continue working with people that I really liked and be involved with whatever they were doing when it wasn't Zynga anymore, and so that's just sort of how I got started. And so I would say I stumbled into it initially, being surrounded by people that were doing interesting things. And then I realized like it's actually it was a very interesting time to be starting to invest actually about 10 years ago, because there were a lot of angels, but it was still sort of manageable, and there weren't so many as there are now, and like a lot of really great companies were getting their start around 10 years ago. I mean,
when was the year that you started investing angel as like an angel investor?
Maybe 2010 or 2011. So about 10 years ago.
Okay. That time, were you at Zynga or?
Yeah, I was still at Zynga. The first 3 years I was still at Zynga. Yep.
Okay. So another really important question that I want to ask is, should a founder actually invest in other startup while they're founder of one startup?
This is a tough question, right? I think most investors would tell you no, because they want to be focused, right? I would say it depends on there's such a broad spectrum of investing, right? And you can learn a lot from investing, and it depends on investing is something. It depends on what they're getting out of it. Like if you want your career to be investing, if you want to have a fund and run a company at the same time, that's pretty difficult to do. I mean, they're full-time jobs, and to succeed in angel investing or seed stage investing in a really big way now requires a lot of dedication. And so it depends on what their goals are. Like they just if it's like a sort of side project where you're just thinking about something because you want to be mentally sort of stimulated by learning new things in other areas that you're not working on in your main company, and it doesn't take up that much time, then I mean, fine. But I guess ultimately it's such a personal decision. And I'll just say, like, by the time I was making angel investments at Zynga, I mean, the company was, over 1,000 people. So it's not like if I spent 3 hours talking to somebody, it was like, we were reducing the overall output of the company at that point. So I guess I would say it also depends on the stage. But for me, like the right reasons to angel invest are the best reasons for me personally. It's just like, it's to learn and it's to build your network. And so, like,
when you say learn, is it to learn from other, great passionate founders in the Valley, or also it sounds like to stay relevant in the market? What do you mean by learn from, angel investing while you are founder of one startup?
Well, I mean, it's like you can almost live sort of parallel experiences, right? You can never actually put yourself in the shoes of a founder and know everything they're going through. But if you really do your best to help people and they trust you, then you can get involved in a lot of the key moments of a company. And you can live through these moments that when you're starting your own company, you only get to go through them once in a while. And so you can start to build up like a better muscle memory for how to approach some of those moments. And so it can make you a better operator, depending on how involved you are. And there's certain interactions that you can get a lot of practice at. And so it's not just in sort of like learning about the markets, which is great. I mean, you can go and work with people who are experts in a market that you're not, and you can learn a lot from them and then help them with whatever knowledge you have about whatever area you have expertise in. But also, like, there's just sort of muscle memory you can get on these different, like when it comes to raising a Series A, if you're an angel investor and you help your startups raise their Series A, well, then you're going to get some experience of raising Series A 50 times. And that's really helpful later when you have to go raise your Series A, right?
That is so true. Right. Yeah, I actually had an image of a founder. They shouldn't, invest in other firm because you should use all your capital and money, time, everything into the baby that you're creating right now. But sounds like if the stage is right, or if you have some time to commit to other things, you should definitely start investing in other firms. I think. Yeah, that's really interesting. Your answer, Justin. Okay. And then another thing that I want to ask is, so you made like about 50 plus investments, and some of the notable exits that I recall is Tolo and Viv, I think. Tolo was acquired by Google and Viv was acquired by Samsung, right? What is your criteria of picking, which startups to back? Like, what made you, exposed to a bunch of, companies?
So I think I was like lucky when I got involved in angel investing 10 years ago. Silicon Valley's angel community was still a bit smaller. So I started going to Y Combinator demo days, and there was only 50 people there or something. And, it was just much smaller. There were sort of like 10 companies on stage, and you could talk to every single one of them after the event. It was very different. It was a very different time. And so
you can't imagine that now, right?
No. So anyway, things have changed a lot. And so I really wow, it's mind blowing, and it's awesome. Like it's so good how much innovation is happening now. And how many great companies there are in so many different places all around the world. And so, when it comes to identifying, so much of it just comes from the people you work with. And this is like another reason to go and invest in angel investing companies, is because you meet more new people. Like you meet the people that they work with, the investors they work with, and who are the great employees from their company. And you start to build a network that has where the opportunities come to you. And so I guess what I would say is that it's just about it's a many turn game. And it's not about the individual investment. It's about the longer you do, the more you realize you're going to see the same people over and over again, or you'll have the opportunity to work with people in different capacities at different companies for a long time, even way more than I ever expected. And so it's just about cultivating relationships with great people and staying involved with what they're doing.
Right. Now that you mentioned about Y Combinator, I want to talk a little bit more about that. So some of your portfolio companies like Lambda School or Substack, I think they're amazing companies, and they're, the graduates of Y Combinator, right? What's your view on the YC companies? I just want to ask.
Well, so this is a great example. I don't see Substack as a YC company, because I was an advisor to Kick Messenger, where Chris was one of the co-founders of that company.
Oh, really?
So
okay.
I knew him for 5 years before he started Substack, and I was advising him on his previous company. And so this is what I really mean, these connections, build them, and you work with people. And Jiraj, the other founder of Substack, I worked with him on some projects where we literally were building some messenger platforms together that are related to what I'm working on today. And so a lot of these stories, they sort of weave together and come full circle in interesting ways. And so the second that I heard that, Jiraj and Chris were working on something, it was just and then it happened to be in an area that I thought was super interesting and that I'm really passionate about, which is figuring out how to empower more people who aren't sort of in technology to get leverage from technology to go build their own sort of businesses, or to create more freedom for them to learn something new, or to take their talents and be able to make a living from it. It was just easy to do that one.
Right. Everyone is connected, right? Especially in the Valley. I think a lot of people think it's a very big community, but also at the same time, for top people, it's a very small community, I think. And so you say you don't actually see Substack as a YC company, but again, could I ask what's your maybe a general view of YC? Is it a better, really good place to source your deals if you're an angel? What would you say? So because some investors said after the company joined YC, they may be sometimes overvalued, and it gets difficult to invest in those firms. What's your view on this?
Venture is all about picking the right companies, right? So if you would, I wouldn't worry about the average company. I don't really have an opinion on whether they're overvalued, but I wouldn't even, you just were to index all of YC companies. I don't know that that's a good strategy. I think VC is all about trying to pick the companies that are most likely to succeed. And what I'll say is that like I've been amazed at how many different verticals YC has been able to expand into, and I think it's great because they're bringing the sort of things that have succeeded in software to all these different industries now. I'll say that I don't invest in some of those companies because I can't diligence them as an angel. Like I don't have a team to go and do all the work required to understand every type of company that they now have in their portfolio. But I just love hearing about it and like learning about these new things. So, I mean, I think in general, like YC has been just 100% positive for the startup ecosystem. And then I think like it all comes down to, at the end of the day, picking the right company, because any of the companies that were really hugely successful from YC, there's nobody that like is really upset about the valuation they got at YC, right? I mean, it was just a very early stage in the company. And so, where they're all very happy investors. So it doesn't really change the equation, which is like, you really just want to end up working with the best teams.
True. And you mentioned about team right now, but so all those 50 investments, you invested without having any team, right? How do you like do the due diligence, or like, like how do you get source deals? How do you manage all the emails from your founders? How did all thing happen?
Yeah, there's a huge mix there. Okay, so like some people like Chris and Jiraj, if I know they're doing a company, like I don't have to do any diligence really. I mean,
That's true.
I have a very quick conversation, and I'm happy to be involved with their next thing. And there's been a lot of great people I've worked with like that, actually, like ex-Zynga folks, like Roger Dickey's, both of his companies, and even Andy Tian, who started a company, who is former GM of Zynga Beijing. So like, there's been a lot of great companies that have come out of those types of deals where it was just someone great, like I want to work with them again, and there's not a whole lot of diligence to do. When it comes to like other types of companies that like didn't come directly from my network, I think I really value people that come in with a warm introduction, right? I mean, I think at the end of the day, like if someone's able to get in touch with me through somebody I really trust, that means a lot. And so like I always try to take the time to meet with people who come in through that way. I think of course, like going through your email and digging into every sort of introduction, or not introduction, but just like a pitch that's sent to me without an introduction, it's it would just be too time consuming without a team, right? So it's not to say that I haven't replied to those emails before. I mean, I think there have been situations where I've replied to those, and probably some situations where I've ended up investing in those types of companies. But in general, it's much more difficult for me to do without the bandwidth.
Right. And what will be the value that you provide to those founders? So you mentioned that you may not actually do a lot of diligence if you know the founders or if you actually understand the market, right? So you may be a really good expert for those founders that's doing gaming companies, but for other founders, what's the value that you provide to them?
Well, so I actually haven't done that many investments in game companies, which is kind of interesting. Actually, like all the companies I'm talking about, from ex-Zynga employees or people that I worked with in the past, none of them really started game companies after, for the most part. And what I would say is like one way to look at games is like, in many ways, it's just consumer applications. And actually, in some ways, not always, it can be one of the most difficult places to build consumer applications. It's very, very competitive market.
That is true.
Every games has so much competition, and so if you can succeed in games, it's a very good practice to succeed in other markets. One of the nice things about game companies is like you need operational excellence to succeed in games. Like it's very rare that you can succeed for an extended period of time with a game unless you're very, very good at operating it over time. So if people can bring that skill set with them, and then they get a chance to succeed on another type of consumer app, they usually are like, they've really got the skill set they need to go and to do a great job there. So I would say that in a lot of ways, like those experiences, how do you grow a game? How do you decide what to work on next? The roadmap and all of this, like how do you differentiate in a crowded and competitive market? These are things that you can bring from games into anything in consumer, and it's all pretty applicable. And I'm not saying like the more people tend to think it's how do you gamify these other experiences. I'm actually, generally speaking, I don't think that you should. I don't think you should gamify experiences actually. But when it comes to like, what are some of the ways you can improve retention? How do you measure these things, and how do you figure out what to build next? These are skills that are just sort of like operating skills that you get from building consumer products. And that's what drives what succeeds for the most part. So in some ways, I just think games is a great training ground for people to get good at these skills.
Right, I see. Interesting. Yeah, because when I was looking at your portfolio companies, I was a bit confused because I saw like you're really like a game guy, so you would invest in a bunch of games. And I had this image of like, when I look at the portfolio, was it like a Drive Time, which was like a company that would allow you to do game while driving? When I saw that, I was like, okay, this is the kind of the company that Justin invests in. But when I look at other firms, it was like Snack Pass or other firms that's like food delivery services. I think you invest in a few of them. I got a little bit confused, but now that you explained that, it makes sense.
Well, I mean, let me give you just a quick example. So
sure.
Like I could explain how even like any of these investments sort of relates to lessons maybe I learned from Zynga, whether it be operational or just even business models. So if you think about a company like Lambda School, like it's really hard to imagine how, like what would you see in that company that reminds you of some of your experiences that it resonated with me very quickly. And one of them was, well, first of all, Austin is an amazing founder. He's really, really great. And so that was like the first thing that got me hooked. But the second thing is like from a business model perspective, actually Lambda School is doing to education what Zynga did to games. And so I mentioned earlier, what did Zynga do to games? We took the friction off the front end. We took the risk off the front end. Before there was risk in buying a game. You spent $50 and you'd bring it home. And a lot of times you would not like what you got. If you look at Lambda School, you have a bunch of people that have the same experience with university. They spend $20,000 or $100,000 and they don't like what they get. And so my question was like, well, how do you turn this into the experience like freemium brought to games with Zynga? And that, to me, I think freemium is like one of the native sort of web experiences for how these different businesses have to be remodeled to exist. And so when I look at Lambda School, it's like you make it free up front. And when you do that, you de-risk it. And so you can do all these things around how to make it social and how to make it way more inclusive in the types of people who can get access to the education. And then on the tail end, they pay you if it works. So if you abstract it like that, it's in many ways,
it's so similar. Yeah, it's so similar. Yeah, for the audience sake, to give more introduction about Lambda School. So basically, Lambda School is a coding school, and for usual coding school, you need to pay fee upfront, and you don't know the outcome, right? But for Lambda School, you don't have to pay upfront, and after you graduate, and you will get a position at software company. They deduct some of the, so they basically get some of the money of the salary you get at that firm, right? That's how Lambda School works now. Yeah, it's very similar to what Zynga was doing, kind of democratizing the whole industry, right?
Yeah, and if you don't get a job, then you don't pay anything, and so it removes the risk for the people that are going to school. And I know this is a really this is a very real problem for a lot of people over the last 10 years or so, when many people have come out of school without a job, and so the value to those. Well, it's very obvious because they have friends who have been through this, or brothers and sisters. And so to me, I see this as like a potential solution to that problem. And so, yeah, I got really excited about that. And like, I think there's always something about these companies that I feel like is, it's not always something I learned from Zynga. Of course, I'm learning things from the investments I'm making all the time.
Sure.
It's just, there's something that that I've learned along the way that makes me excited about it, in addition to the team and their approach.
Very interesting. Very interesting indeed. Okay. And so another thing that I want to ask is there like a core investor that you always invest together with, or is there like, there's none?
There's just a lot of friends that I share things with. And I think you start to know like who gets excited about what types of things, right? And so it really just depends on the type of company. There's a lot of people that I love to work with, but they don't all get excited about the same types of things. And that's fine. It's just like, if you want to go to a certain restaurant, if you want to go to sushi, you bring a friend who likes sushi, right? And if I want to, I'm going to go share it with people who like game companies. So it just depends. But
Makes
yeah,
sense.
I mean, there's lots of great people that I've been able to invest with multiple times, and some of them, I was able to get them involved with Playco. So that's been great.
Right. And so speaking of someone that you see as an interesting investor, I think that will be Peter Thiel. And you are a mentor for Thiel Foundation, and also you are an individual investor, individual LP for Founders Fund, right? How would you describe your relationship with Peter Thiel, or your view on Peter as an investor or businessman?
Well, I think I'm glad that Peter wrote 0 to 1, because I think that like that type of thinking, he's such a clear thinker, and that his thesis in the book is so it's articulated so well, and I think it's so important, and it resonates with me so much about like the things that I learned, and to me it seems like something that's very important, and so it's nice that that's out there, because what I would say to anyone is like, if you want to really learn about how Peter thinks, you shouldn't listen to me. You should go read that book. And the great thing about it is it's not sort of like a marketing piece or like your typical business book. Like it really is very, very deep thinking from someone who truly understands the market. And I guess what I would say is like this idea of being contrarian, but truly being contrarian and like exercising that muscle. And in trying to figure out like, what are I think at one point, like there's this, I think an interview question that Peter said that he likes, which is, what is something you think is true that almost no one agrees with you on? And I think like, this is something that, that type of thinking, I think is something he's really great at. And that's, I've always, if I have a chance to work with him on something, it's of course, like I love to, get Founders Fund involved. I mean, this is why I actually, so I made some investments in Japan, and Smart Round, of course, like Founder Fund, their APAC Scout Fund invested in their last round.
The Asia Pacific Fund, right? And Smart Rounds is the kind of a SaaS, software as a service for venture investors and founders.
Yep.
Right. Interesting. Okay. And so now I want to talk a little bit about specific deals, which is, I talk about Lambda and Substack, which were something that I wanted to cover, but about Tolo and Viv, which were your successful exit, one of the successful exits. And for Viv, it raised about 30 million till Series B. And after 4 years, since 2012, it got acquired by Samsung. Could you explain about what the Viv, the company is, and how you got into the deals?
Well, so Viv was basically building a voice assistant like Siri before that really existed for most other platforms outside of iOS. And the idea was that it would be much more advanced than other platforms, because they were just focused on solving that problem exclusively. And yeah, Samsung bought it because obviously as a way to compete with Apple, that was important, right? And actually the people that were at Viv, several of the team members were the folks who were behind Siri previously. So like they really knew what they were doing. And their idea was like that Siri became sort of something else at Apple, that they never were able to fulfill the vision they'd set out to fulfill. So like, this is what resonates with me, like this whole, like this longer journey thing about people that they're on these companies, or they're on a timeline, and some people are chasing themes or like an idea for a much longer period. And like that's why I'm back, now, and we're doing Playco. It's like, this is something that I've been thinking about for a long time. So the same thing with Viv. It was like, it's one of those situations where you have somebody who's really excited about this future, and they just didn't quite get to create it the first time around.
I see. And how about Tolo? So Tolo was the company that was founded in the same year, 2012. And right after 2 years, it got acquired by Google, right? And it's a company that does a Facebook campaign, was it?
Yeah, well, so Toro was actually started by the team that was probably half the team were the people who were building and who made Farmville at Zynga. And so this is an example team I knew really well. And they were just like, they're an example of the team that you don't do diligence on. You just go ahead and you're like, yes, work
Right.
with you again. These are great people, and they're close friends. So that one, I wish I had more interesting story there. Yeah, they're the Farmville guys.
Right. I mean, it's always, I think, but sometimes it's like that, right? They're the friend from the really good company, and you invest in them because they're the friend, you trust them, and then you actually get some good amount of capital gain too, as an angel. Interesting. Okay, so now I want to talk about Playco, your new company, which had a successful Series A, 100 million of funding. Before we go into specific, could you tell me, what Playco is again?
So Playco is focused on something very, very simple. That seems so simple that it almost seems like it shouldn't be enough to go and build a huge company on. It's a very basic idea, which is you should be able to play games with your friends very easily. And so I started alluding to this earlier and the very beginning of the podcast, but turns out it's such an obvious thing to say. People want to play with their friends. Everybody would agree with this. And the market for this is literally everyone. If you just say people want to play with their friends, this is everyone. My grandmother, your grandmother, everybody wants to interact and have positive interactions with the people they care about, whether it's family, friends, or people that just they want to connect with, right? And it's just too difficult to do right now. And because it's too difficult, it's actually surprisingly uncommon. And so you have this thing that if you could successfully make it work in the way that it should, and that's easy enough, that it could be something that we all do and that we all do regularly. We're on Zoom right now, and Zoom solved the problem of how do you make video chat easy?
Right.
It's not just coronavirus that makes us all using video chat right now. It's also that Zoom really solved the problem. I mean, video chat has been around for over 10 years, right?
Right.
And in many ways, it's been buggy. It's been very difficult to use, and so people didn't use it. But even before coronavirus, Zoom was growing like crazy because they figured out how to make it so easy. You just drop a link, tap it, and you're chatting, and it's so predictable the way that it works. And so if you think about Zoom, they have that link that you just send, and you never worry about like is he on an iPhone or what is he using and what is he gonna have to do. And we're building that experience for games. And what that means is that you can just hop into a game with me just as predictably as you could expect me to jump on Zoom without any issues. Except for I would go one step further and say that it'll be even easier for you to play a game using our tech than Zoom, because Zoom, some people still download the app, right? You can use it in a web browser, but a lot of people still use the app. And our games, it's not even necessary. And so we're excited about like the new experiences that we'll create, because we all have these mobile devices with messengers and with video chat on them. And what other types of experiences can we have now that we're in these spaces together? Like what types of things do we want to be doing in a Zoom chat together? I've seen people going and playing poker games where they all say, okay, everybody load up this URL in your web browser and we'll all go to this website together and play poker together. Like, why isn't that part of the experience right in front of us? Why isn't it integrated into this experience? It's something that's easy for us to do. These are the problems we're going out and solving. So we're working with a bunch of these partner companies that have these social services, whether it's messengers or video chats and other types of social services, and just trying to figure out like what is the best experience for each of these, and what types of activities do people want to do in this space? How can we help people connect in a way that's more meaningful?
Right. So, and you team up with Michael Carter. And when I heard that news about 2 weeks ago on TechCrunch, I was blown away. And because I knew by Michael, he has a really good experience in venture capital industry, but also he started Game Closure. And Game Closure was pretty much doing a very similar thing, right? You can play game on the HTML. And he moved his company, which was in the Bay Area, to Japan because what he told me was that because there are bigger markets for gaming in Japan. Why Playco was founded in Japan? Was it for the same reason?
Well, it's a great question. What I'll say in general is that game companies have been already recently, the largest game companies have been growing outside the US. So when we think about the biggest, most exciting recent game companies that have been invested in or have just been making a lot of news, we think about like Playrix, they're in Europe. We think about Wildlife, they're in Latin America. These companies, like probably of the top 10 game companies right now that are sort of private, large, fast-growing mobile game companies, the majority of them are no longer in the US. So this transition has happened. It's already been happening. And so what we're seeing is that this talent is everywhere. And in a world where this talent is really everywhere, and they're learning and they're excelling at these different companies all around the world now, like how should a company be architected to succeed when that's the future? And so, 13, 14 years ago, maybe the answer was start a company in San Francisco.
Right.
Do that. But today, I don't think that's the answer, actually. And so it's already playing out that these companies are succeeding in a very big way. And so what we wanted to do was figure out, how do we take advantage of this idea and this fact that there are great people all around the world? And I think having a strong presence in Japan is huge, because there's such a rich history of gaming here. There's some of the best gaming companies in the world. And the talent, like, of creating these characters and these stories that I mentioned before, this is something that's, Japan is the leader in the world in this type of business. And so what inspired me is, I think that there's an opportunity to work with the best people in Japan and work with the best people in Silicon Valley, and then to have sort of one leg in Silicon Valley and one leg in Japan, and then be distributed everywhere in the world, and build this sort of new type of company where we have a strong base in places that are really important, but then we also have employees that are everywhere. And so we've been building the company in this distributed fashion, and we have a lot of employees in many, many different countries all around the world now, and we work remotely. We're growing very quickly during the age of COVID, and all done over video chat.
Maybe that's the new definition of the new international startup, right? One leg in Silicon Valley and one leg in Japan, because US is a still really big market. If you kind of have a kind of monopoly in the US, you can go bigger in the international market, but also you need to cover Asia market, right? Especially in the gaming. Understood. And okay, I have another two final questions. So another one will be, you raised $100 million for Series A. That's a big raising, especially for the venture industry in Japan. What's the $100 million for, rather than the stuff that you mentioned, something that you're building right now? You already hired 75 people, right? So I assume a lot of things are going on there, but could you tell us something that you can tell here?
Yeah, I mean, so I think we're thinking about this from a very long-term perspective, right? And so the people and the partners that we have, they understand that. And it's not that what we're doing is super capital intensive, like we're going to go build one giant game that requires $100 million to build. It's more like we have so much interesting territory we need to explore, that that it's all very, very compelling. Not like we're searching for something that'll work. It's like we have a lot of things. We're very confident that they'll work and that people are going to love, and we want to make sure we're making progress on a bunch of them. And so I earlier I said at Zynga we had this, we had many games that succeeded before we got to Farmville, and we're still in the early stages of Playco, where we have products out already, actually, that are succeeding, and we're just not ready to talk about them yet. And then we're learning a lot from those. And we're going to keep learning and keep iterating and releasing more and discovering more, like how these things work. And our hope is that we're learning something from everything we release, whether it's a feature or a game. We're always making progress toward fulfilling our vision as we're describing it, right? And someday, maybe in a few years, we have our Farmville, and all of a sudden there's a game that has over 1 billion people playing it at once. And it sounds crazy, but we think it's achievable. Back when Farmville came out, we had 3/4 of everybody on Facebook was playing the game. And if that happened today, with how big the ecosystem is, it'd be something like over 2 billion people would be playing this game. And so the fact that people haven't been able to achieve that has to do with the structure of the mobile games market. The way all the games are distributed now is only through advertising. And that's very limiting in the sense that the only way to grow faster is to make more revenue for each user that comes, and then you can reinvest that in advertising. And there's nothing like wrong with this model, except for the fact that it actually incentivizes developers not to make games that you can play with your friends. So, and this isn't obvious to most people, but every player that you purchase through an ad that doesn't spend money will lower the amount of money you make per player. And so if I bought 2 users and one of them spends money and one of them doesn't, well, that person who doesn't is lower the average amount of money that I made per user, right? And so the game companies have become excellent at targeting the players who are likely to spend money. And a lot of the ad technology has been about making that easier to do and more precise. The unfortunate side effect of this is not everyone wants to spend money in games. And so when you want to play with your friends, if they're not a spender, well, then they're not getting the advertisement. And so if you've ever wondered, why do I play this game and none of my friends play it? It's because everybody's being targeted for the exact thing that's right for them. And no one's focused on making a game that everyone can play together because the economics don't work with this current advertising ecosystem. And so we need to figure out the technology and the design around an ecosystem that will support people to discover these games in a way that's very frictionless and low cost. And so those are the problems that we're solving. And when we solve that, then we can go and make games that people can play with their friends.
Why did you raise money from Sequoia? So Michael, he already had a company in Japan, Game Crojo, right? And I think he got funded by 500 startups and Benchmark. And they were already like some of the top tier investors in the Bali, right? Why Sequoia?
I mean, again, like I think it comes back to partners and building a business, right? I think there's always somebody who you can, if you're working with people who really understand what you're doing, then you have the space you need to go and get it done and the support that you need to go and do something bigger than you could have done without them. And so, I mean, Sequoia is just one of those partners. So, I mean, it's for us, like, you know, we're happy to have the chance to do it.
I see. Okay. And I think we've been seeing this trend of kind of a celebrity VCs or celebrity investors, right? So for your Series A, you had Keisuke Honda from Keisuke Angel Fund, and also Will Smith from Dreamers Fund, right? What are the values that those celebrity VCs provide to you?
Well, we're trying to build experiences and games that have huge appeal, right? And these folks, like, I mean, Will Smith, he's you know, I'm not an expert in Hollywood, but I think he's the most bankable actor in Hollywood. I think he's like, if you get him in a movie, it's like the highest ROI you can get out of any actor.
Sure.
I think that's the stat. And so, like, these are people that are mass market. They understand what people, like, the masses want. It's not about making this game that's some game that like a very small amount of people will play obsessively. It's about how do we make something that everybody loves. And I think people like Will and Keisuke, like, they understand that, you know, that's a lot of what their work has been about. And also, like, honestly, they're great people. Like, I think both of them are, you know, and Keisuke is like working on a lot of important things in Japan and outside of Japan. So it's just been good to get to know them. And like, I think they're going to be super helpful partners in the business, just like everybody else. Everybody that I mean, for us, it's most important that everyone we're working with is strategic. So they're just in the same as everyone else.
Got it. Thank you so much, Justin. So that was my final question. But do you have anything you want to say to the audience, especially that want to work for Playco?
Well, I mean, please reach out. I mean, we're hiring quickly right now, and we are hiring everywhere. So, I mean, it doesn't really matter where you live.
Oh,
yeah. As long as you have an internet connection that's stable, and you're excited about what we're doing, we want to talk. So please reach out. And what I would say is, like, I leave you with this, which is just that there's a company that you go to when you want information. It's Google. There's a company you go to when you want sort of social interaction. It's Facebook. There's a company that you go to when you want to buy something. It's Amazon. There's still no company that you can go to play with friends. And we think that this is like so obvious that it's painful. And so, you know, there's a lot of problems we have to solve along the way, but we're making good progress. And if you're excited about like that future of trying to build a company that has, you know, ambitions that are that broad, then like, please, you know, reach out. We love to talk.
Okay, link in the description, guys. All right. Well, Justin, thank you so much for being here. I kept you in an hour. I know you're very busy. I really appreciate you for being here. And audience, I think, have learned a lot from this episode. Thank you so much. Bye-bye.
Thanks for having me, Ryan.